Thank you. Welcome. I'm going to call this meeting of the Governance Committee to order. I want to start with a roll call. Councilor Lombardi?
Here.
Councilor Tabor?
Here.
And I'm Councilor Cook, and I am present as well. We're going to start our discussion today with the committee rotation schedule. This is something the committee had been discussing for a while and looking at committees and determining which committees are on a healthy rotation schedule per their ordinance or definition. And so I have invited the City Clerk Barnaby, to join us today because the City Clerk keeps all the records of the rotation and who's appointed when to individual committees. And with that said, I was hoping that we could look at one committee and see if we could kind of track back appointments and see where that committee schedule was off. And so I pulled a committee out of research the City Clerk had done on tracing back appointments. I just now pulled out parking, traffic, and safety. And the reason I pulled out parking, traffic, and safety is that almost all of the committee members on parking, traffic, and safety are set to expire exactly the same time, whereas they're supposed to be on a rotational schedule. And so I thought it would be a good place to start into looking back at appointments to see if we could find where that rotation got off, where somebody didn't fulfill a term, or with where somebody's term was shortened and then we appointed somebody for a full term rather than fulfilling that role. So with that said, I would love to, if the City Clerk has thoughts, I would love to hear from her on these appointments and the rotation schedule.
So we're looking at parking, traffic, and safety, and the numbers in blue are the current numbers. So if you start with Harold Whitehouse, you would see that he's no longer on there. I'm sorry. Is he still on there? Yes.
Yes.
Yes, he is. I'm sorry. So his original date of appointment was 12/19/2011, and then he's served consecutive terms. His last term was September 7th, 2021 through September 17th, 2024. And trying to see if there's anything written in the notes about him. I don't see anything. So basically, these individuals all serve, I have histories on them. Some of them fill unexpired regular terms. If you looked at Stephen Pesci was filling an unexpired term of Sherry Donnemeyer. So his term was from an original appointment of 7/15/2019, and then he was reappointed September 7th of 2021 through September 17th, 2024. Are there any specific questions that you might have that I can?
Is there anyone on this committee that is, I can kind of look through the data and figure out, is anyone on this committee currently serving the end of an unexpired term, or are we all in full terms at this point?
Okay, so if somebody's in an unexpired term, let me just take a look at it and see. So there is one, if you look at Mark Syracusa, he was appointed September 7th of 2021, and his term began on September 18th of 2021, and he is filling the unexpired term of he filled the unexpired term of Jonathan Sandberg. Jonathan wasn't reappointed. So,
Do we know when when the unexpired term was set to end?
Jonathan filled the unexpired term of Stephen Pesce till August 4th of 2020. So his term, he was, there was twice. So he was an alternate at first, and then he became a regular member. And he was filling the unexpired term of Ralph DiBernardo until September 7th of 2021. He did reapply he did want to seek another term, but it was decided upon the mayor at the time not to reappoint Jonathan. So Jonathan did not serve another term. So his term ended on September 17th, 2021. And Erica took over his unexpired term till August 4th of 2020, which then she was reappointed in August 3rd of 2020 through August 4th of 2023.
Okay. So, then Mark Syracusa's in which seat at this point? Is he just in an independent term?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Mark Syracusa is he in an independent term, his own term at this stage? Or, is he still fulfilling a term? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. So, I believe he's in his own term now. I can look up. I didn't bring the boards and commission list with me. I brought all my appointment information. Let me just go to the website real quick and check that out. For his own term, 9/7/2021 through 9/17/2024.
Okay. So, with that, we would have 4 members rotating in 2024 and only an alternate rotating in 2023. Is that accurate?
That's accurate.
Okay. Is it possible to go back and trace these then further back and see where our, where the schedule, the rotation schedule changed at some point?
Well, we could go back to when parking, traffic, and safety used to be traffic and safety, because I think that would have some of the members that have transferred. So if I go to,
Yes, Harold Whitehouse was one of those transferees.
yes, here we are. Here's traffic and safety. So if there's somebody that the committee changed to parking, traffic, and safety per an ordinance change on September of 2011. Harold Whitehouse was appointed originally 4/19 of 2010. He was appointed to the new committee 12/19/2011. And that was, they gave everybody a very short term. They gave everybody till 1/1/2012. and then they started with the regular appointment schedule.
When they started with the regular appointment schedule, did they just appoint everyone to the same term, or did they appoint individuals to 1 year, 2 year, and 3 year terms separately?
Traffic and safety is on a, I believe it's it's a 3-year term.
3 year, yeah.
And they seem to all expire from the 9/17/2024 because they were all appointed on 9/7/2021, with the exception of Erica. So Erica was filling, I think, an unexpired term as an alternate. Yes, she filled the unexpired term of when Jonathan Sandberg was an alternate member. So that was until August 4th of 2020. And then August 3rd of 2020, before she expired, she got reappointed for a 3-year term till August 4th of 2023. So they're all 3-year terms.
So then it would seem that on January 1st, 2012, that everyone was appointed at the same time to 3-year terms. Is that fairly accurate? Or was there a rotation envisioned initially that changed somewhere along the lines?
Like they were all appointed until January 1 of 2012. And then they went from that point on to a 3-year term.
Okay. So in this case, if we wanted to rebalance so that there were appointments, staggered appointments, so we didn't lose all the expertise of the committee at the same time, we would have to find another method to reset those appointments, either drawing by lot or as far as expiration of terms.
Well, this is governed by an ordinance, so we'd have to see if there would require an ordinance change, which I think it probably would. I think Bob would agree with me on that. Because it mentions 3-year terms. So we would have to have an ordinance change to allow for those to be staggered terms.
Okay. Thank you.
So maybe it'd be helpful, Bob, are you in accord with Kelly that the best way to, if you want to affect a change, to re-stagger or reset the length of term for the Parking, Traffic, and Safety Committee, that it's probably through an ordinance change?
In general, yes, but I've been aware for a little while that this idea of going through all the boards and commissions to create a stagger on everything might be coming along through the governance committee, and so I've been trying to think if there wasn't some quicker, more efficient way to do it rather than go through the ordinance book committee by committee and making every change. This would be a big job. I mean, it probably is the most legitimate way to accomplish the result, just the way that Kelly said, but it's a big job. So I have been trying to think of some other ideas that might be more quick, such as a new ordinance, but one new ordinance, giving the mayor the authority in situations where there's an ordinance created by the city or a committee created by the city as distinct from, say, Board of Adjustment or Planning Board, which really state law creates those, of maybe one ordinance that gives the mayor the authority in making appointments to create the stagger. And therefore, maybe being able to accomplish in one ordinance what we'd otherwise would have to change 20 ordinances. That was my sum total of my thoughts to date on it.
I applaud the efficiency, but I think for residents appointed to these committees, I think it's valuable for them to know at the outset the length of their term, so that that's not in flux with them and the members around them, which would argue for actually changing the ordinances one by one. So I think, I'm just thinking of it from the point of view of somebody who's appointed and says, how long does my term last, and how long does the term last of the others on the board? Thereby giving us more work to do.
I guess I was thinking that because of what you just said, John, that I wonder if the way to go about it and is to do it at the expiration of terms. It's a long process that way. But if people were told they're in a 3-year term, it's kind of crummy to say, okay, well, your term actually expires next year. And so I guess my thought was that the way to do it is that, especially where you have everybody turning over just about in the same year, you could offer a 1-year term, 2-year term, and a 3-year term to those people to fill it. And if someone opts into that, that's fine. Otherwise, maybe drawing lots at that point. I agree that doing an overall ordinance with all these committees makes it pretty complex, because they have different term lengths, and different ordinances affect each committee. So that was the only kind of equitable way I could think of doing it. I think we're going to be stuck with the problem for a long time until we can move it through this. But I don't see a way in which we can, on day now, say, okay, everybody's terms have changed. I think that would be chaotic, frankly.
Well, for what it's worth, can I go a little further than with my thought? It was not that everybody's term is over and we start today. It was going to say something like, when making appointments to boards, commissions created by ordinance, the mayor will have the authority to adjust terms to create a rotation, something like that. And the way that would work in real life is, when somebody's term expires and the mayor goes to make a new appointment, the mayor would say, well, this one should be for 1 year or 2 years or 3 years in order to create the rotation.
Okay, so we agree.
Well, that's what this is going to take years to go through otherwise, unless we come up with some idea like that.
Well, it's still going to take years through that, I would think.
Well, it won't take years to get the ordinance adopted.
No.
We could have that thing done
Yeah.
quickly.
I think one of the challenges, though, unfortunately, with an ordinance like that, is most mayors, and I haven't been mayor, I can't speak to our current mayor or former mayors, but I would think that they would want to appoint people to the full term possible. So there would be a disincentive to stagger, because you would want your appointees to serve as long as possible in roles. So that's one of the challenges. You rely on the benevolence of the mayor
The kindness of others.
to make that decision that oh, I only want to appoint somebody for a year or 2 years, not a full 3-year term, or in some cases, 4-year terms. So that is the challenge around an ordinance like that. It's not very clear when it comes to guidance. And we could end up in the same situation in 10 years with no changes.
Right.
Yeah. Does anyone have any other thoughts on ways to address this challenge?
Oh, I guess excuse me.
Go.
Thank you. I guess the ordinance would have to specify that mayors have to fulfill terms in accordance with what the ordinance is laid out as. And if the only vacancies are for a 1-year term, then they have to fill that. And they have to live with that, I think.
In other words, don't go into the ordinance, just take what we've got now. Even though we've got 4 out of 5 stacking up for reappointment in 1 year. Have I got that correct?
Yeah, so the next person who comes up, or if 4 out of 5 are going to come up at the same time, the ordinance has to say, well, you know, some of them have to be 1 year, some of them have to be 2 years, some of them have to be 3 year, to balance it.
Ask the city.
Yeah, I was just going to pick up on the thread that Bob started, which is, you know, you can concentrate on when a vacancy occurs. You can make that your trigger point so that all those that are currently serving continue to serve, but when a vacancy occurs, X happens. And I think that's where Bob was going on that. Now, whether you do it ordinance by ordinance or a more global, I was liking the efficiency of the global effort, but with that careful trigger, which is it's when the vacancy occurs, then this will happen. But just to emphasize that point of when the vacancy occurs.
Not only a vacancy, but a reappointment, I would.
Yes, by vacancy, I meant the term ends as well, so that's a good clarification. Yes, when a term ends or a vacancy occurs, that this factor of needing to rebuild and reestablish a balance in the rotation schedule, you know, becomes effective.
Would it be possible, the city attorney, is it possible to hold the mayor to that requirement?
If we could write the ordinance in a way that compelled the mayor to do this, then it would be. Since the ordinance isn't written, it's a little difficult to predict that with certainty, but we could certainly try to do that, or see if we can write an ordinance that accomplishes that. And the advantage of it is, of course, it will be so much quicker for the council and all the boards, commissions, and agencies to get into proper sync. And if we could do that ordinance that way, then nothing else would have to be written. And as each vacancy comes up, the mayor looks at it, applies the mayor's responsibilities under this ordinance, and creates the stagger.
There's if I may, there's another piece that I think is important, and that is alternates. And I think that we have alternates on boards because it gives a new person the opportunity to really learn. And I think that anyone coming new to a board who has never been on a board or that board should probably go as an alternate before being a full member. It's my opinion. But I think that should also be, and, you know, if that occurs, then the new member fits into the alternate moves up, and the new member fulfills the rest of the alternate's term.
That's certainly been past practice, but it's not required.
It's not codified.
Right. Do we make that policy, would be the question.
I don't think that's an unreasonable ask to place also in an ordinance like this. It says that if an alternate desires to move into a full role, that they would be considered first.
Yes, they have to apply.
It exists now with respect to the Board of Adjustment. There's actually an ordinance that says alternates have to be considered. But I think that's the only one.
Okay. What's the consensus of the committee? Should we move forward in trying to draft something around this to see if we would be happier with that kind of with language on an ordinance, or should we keep trying to work through appointments and determining, you know, if there's a way to rebalance from existing information?
It's my opinion that trying to rebalance all the committees all at once would be chaotic. And there would be a lot of people who would feel frustrated with that. And I think by phasing it over the period of terms to accomplish it is a much better way to do it.
Right, so on the one hand, we could change ordinances which would require some people's terms to change, and we go through that process. Or we could take Bob's approach, giving the mayor, instructing the mayor to make the changes on expiration of terms and do it gradually. And I agree with you, Vince. I think gradually on expiration is better than suddenly having the ordinance change underneath appointees,
Yeah.
having thought about it.
Why don't I suggest this? If the governance committee wants to look at it, we'll try to write that ordinance that we talked about, that says to the mayor, on the expiration of every term, the mayor should look at the composition of the board or commission involved and stagger the appointments, and the mayor is given authority and required to stagger to change the terms of the appointments such that a stagger gets created, and we'll think of some way to describe that, something like that.
And I think there's a separate issue which would be part of that ordinance. Should alternates be considered first?
If there are ordinances, they're alternates for some and they're not alternates for others. So it'll be something like, in the event alternates exist, and alternates should be considered.
Right.
So,
I always think it's helpful when we can work from language and edit, because then it's a lot easier to be clear in our thoughts on where we are as a committee. So I think I would endorse that process. I think that's a good way to start.
Yeah.
I'm considering this
yeah,
change.
going anyway.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you. And thank you so much to the city clerk for going through parking, traffic, and safety with us and the terms. I think and for sharing your information with the committee members on the different terms and when they expire and don't expire and what the appointments look like. I think it's really helpful background for us when we are looking at these different committees and how did we get here. So I really appreciate it. I think we only have one more issue to address that we might have a question for you.
I will stay on.
Okay. The next issue on the agenda is timing of appointments. And that is a question around timing of appointments, specifically post-election between early November and early January. And so this requires some legal question about whether or not we can alter the timing of those appointments. If we choose, instead of just shorten them, but to lengthen appointments to fall into the next year, is that something that legally we as a council could do?
I'm sure that with regard to the boards and committees created by ordinance, there will be a way that the council could address that issue and determine which mayor, for example, between an outgoing mayor and an incoming mayor could make the appointments. With respect to the boards, committees created by state law, that may not be possible because I think state law does speak to it in some cases.
Where we have state law and ordinance, both governing committee, which I believe is the case for most of our land use boards, is it possible, because they all, I think, say that an individual serves until someone is appointed to take their place, is it possible to change the end of term dates if they are in, say, December 1st, move them to January 10th?
Yes.
Okay.
Now, let me add something to that, which is that if nobody writes anything, we're just looking at the general law of the state. Any member of any board, commission, or agency can remain in a holdover status after their term is expired for as long as that person wants to, as long as the appointing authority is willing to let them. And that's probably the way that some of the situations we have in some of our committees has come about. Some of these just stayed over. I know in the case of the PDA, I think Peter Laughlin stayed on the PDA in a holdover capacity exactly the way I described for 15 years. I mean, nobody wanted to change him, and he was willing to do it.
Counselor, yes.
Would it be helpful to have staff tell us the end of term dates for the land use boards covered by state statute? Because as I recall, they're not all the same. And they're, in other words, they're internally inconsistent with each other. So maybe a starting point for this would be, what's the end of term for planning board? What's the end of term for zoning board of adjustment? What's the end of term for conservation commission, et cetera? So we have those facts in front of us.
In this case, I would turn to the city clerk, who keeps those records.
So the planning board is a 3-year term, and I can tell you that some of them are expiring in 2023. There are 4 members expiring in 2023. And I think the last member, let me just move my phone over, is the council rep. So, and then there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 members all expiring in 2024. So if you have a specific person you're looking to find their term, they are on the board and commission listing. And I have it pulled up on my phone, and if you need me to tell you somebody's term, I can certainly go through that with you. When they were appointed and when their term expires.
Do we know what date the terms expire specifically? I don't remember.
They'll expire on 12/31.
Okay. Okay. What is the case for the zoning board?
What I believe is a 5-year term, but let me just move that up and find that for you. One moment. Zoning board. They are 5-year terms, and their terms expire on a date of December 1st. And there's all different years for some of them that are expiring. We have 1, 2, 3 expiring in 2022. We have one, the council rep in 12/1/2023. We have 2 representatives on the board expiring in 2024. Then we have 1 in 2025 and 1 in 2026.
Thank you. My question, I guess, for legal would be these appointments that expired in December 31st or December 1st, is it possible to move that expiration date or even conditionally move the expiration of the term date? So either you move all the dates into January for expiration, or you say in an election year, the terms are extended into January.
If the term was created by ordinance, it is possible the council could do that. If the term was created by state statute, then it is not possible the council couldn't do that. And I think there may actually be hybrids where in some of the situations, the state statute says that the council can make appointments in accordance with its normal terms or normal practices and procedures, in which case the council could do it. You'd have to take them one by one, figure that out.
Can we also do this with, I guess my other question, if it's not in state statute, then we can automatically just change the expiration dates.
I think you can assume with some confidence that the council has the authority to change those dates.
Counselor Tabor?
Could we ask the clerk also for the Historic District Commission while we're at it?
Are 3-year terms, and they expire in June 1 of various years. We have 1 expiring in 2023, 1 expiring in 2022. We have 2 expiring in 2024, 4 expiring in 2025. And then, of course, we have the council representative whose term would go with the length of the term of the council, so that expiration will be 12/31/2023.
Thank you.
Do we know what other committees have appointment dates between November 1st and January 1st, or is that something that might take a little while to track down?
For January, there are some, let me look real quick.
I think we're specifically looking at November and December.
Okay, so let's look at this, let's look at December 1st. Secretary committees, their terms all expire 12/31/2023. They go with the length of the council.
Which,
The same
Cemetery.
is true for the citywide neighborhood Blue Ribbon Committee. Looks like the Ethics Board is 12/31. The Fee Schedule Committee is 12/31. The Legislative Subcommittee. We have the Pease Development Authority, one expires in January and one expires in December. We have, bear with me here. The Pierce Island Committee. That's in December. We also talked about Planning Board, they are December 31. Rockingham Planning Commission. Sustainable practices just for the council reps are, or staff members are 12/31. Trustees of the trust fund are January 1. Zoning Board of Adjustment are 12/1. So that goes through the whole list.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
what was the first one?
All the Blue Ribbon Committees,
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it was cemetery.
cemetery.
So, Kelly, when you say council term, does that mean through, the old council's in office until inauguration, right? So that would be like January, first Monday in January?
Well, according to our boards and commission list, it would be December 31 of 2023.
Okay.
But that most recently was determined that counselors serve terms, I guess, until you get reappointed. So I guess you would fall into the category where you would continue to serve until someone was appointed into your position.
Okay.
That would be a broad question.
But in writing, it's 12/31.
Yes, that's
Okay.
correct.
Thank you so much, City Clerk. I think that's helpful for us to have an idea of just how many committees we're talking about, and also boards and their rotation. At this stage, it might be reasonable for us to sit down and with the legal department and work out what is reasonable to look at changing dates, or what makes sense as far as an ordinance to recommend a move on some of these dates. Or if we need to change individual, a few of them have their own ordinances. So we could look at those as well and make sure that it's not specified as far as date. and just move those dates. Does that seem like a reasonable process to sit down with legal and do?
Yes, from my opinion, but.
So I'm available for whatever the governance committee wants to do,
Okay.
up to the point.
All right, so since we've spent quite a bit of time looking at all of these
No retirement.
challenges. Thank you to the city clerk for being here and helping us answer some of these questions that we had. I appreciate it.
Need anything else, just let me know. I'd be happy to help you.
Thank you.
Art, if you're all set with me.
Yes, thank you so much for coming today.
Thank you, Kelly.
If there are no further questions, we're going to move on to the next item on our agenda, which is committees and ordinances review. This is the only item on our agenda today. Under the first item, Audit Committee, Boards, Commissions, Committee Ordinances, that I anticipate that we could potentially have any action. With that said, I would like to make sure that we hear from the public before, as a committee, we do take any action or have any discussion around this, because I think it's important that we hear from everyone first and that we know what the opinions are of the people who've come today to speak to us. With that said, I would love to entertain a motion to move public comment on item 4 on the agenda, subsection A, Audit Committee, Boards, Commissions, Committee Ordinances, up before that discussion. As
So moved.
Second?
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. With that said, I would welcome public comment on item 4, section A on the committee. Thank you. Please.
I guess I just have a question. How can we discuss this if you haven't gone over your intention here?
Please come up so that we can hear you on the microphone.
Is there a protocol here, first arrive, first to speak?
No, there is not.
Okay.
Everyone is allowed to speak. So everyone
In
will.
terms of the order, I'd like to speak next. No, you're right.
Excuse me, can we all stop? Everyone will have an opportunity to speak.
Yes, my question is, as a person who would like to speak on this, I would like to get an idea of the committee's position on this before we start taking public comment. That would be my first comment. 'Cause, I mean, I have notes and everything, but it's one of those things that I don't know where the committee stands on this and how they feel about this. So as a resident and taxpayer, I would like to hear that first. So that's my request.
Thank you. I will note for public comment purposes that the question before the committee is whether or not to adopt the changes that are before the committee in red line version, and the committee will be discussing those changes in the red line version. So if you have any comments on the red line versions of these draft ordinances, Chapter 1, Article 3, and Chapter 1, Article 4, we would love to hear from you. Thank you. Please
Gerald-
state your name, yes.
Okay, Gerald Duffy, 428 Pleasant Street. I've been a resident for a hair under 40 years in Portsmouth. I'm here to talk about the Audit Committee, and I'm here specifically to support the proposal to reconfigure the Audit Committee, and I'll explain why. I took an interest in the creation of this committee under the last council, and it seemed to me that it was an excellent idea to have an Audit Committee. It's part of best practice in government. But there was this underlying flavor that it wasn't a compelling case. There was a kind of underlying flavor of almost something below the the proposal to create this committee. And that actually became clear. It became clear in a meeting on December the 16th, and then also this year, when several members of the former council kind of tipped their hands. And you had former Councillor Kennedy saying on December 16th, for some reason, someone in the city doesn't want those books looked at. And then you had former Councillor Whalen in this committee saying that he wanted at least a 10-year forensic audit. And you don't ask for anything forensic unless you believe there's some bodies buried somewhere. So that's really the stuff of, it's kind of poison for civic and civil discourse because it insinuates wrongdoing without providing any kind of basis for it. So that was kind of what I felt underneath this move towards the audit committee. And then watching the December 16th meeting, or maybe the 15th, I can't remember, was one of the most painful exercises I've been through in watching a public meeting. In that at that point, the committee had devolved into a power struggle and a turf war between committee members and city staff, with the committee not getting the authority, the level of authority they thought they deserved. And so there was an atmosphere of hostility that I haven't seen before. You had members of the committee describing the work of the deputy city manager and their staff as disgusting and unprofessional. And as Med McKagan said, when you're elected official, you kind of sign up for things. People are going to be disagreeable and obnoxious, and you just kind of have to sit and take it. With the staff, that's not true. I mean, the elected body is accountable to me and the residents. So are the committees. The staff work for us, and we do not pay anyone on the staff enough to sit there and take that kind of abuse. So I don't think there's necessarily anything the governance committee can do about that. But in this case, it makes a strong case for a fresh start. And the Government Finance Employees Association, which is the gold standard for this kind of audit work, is crystal clear on that. They recommend that the audit committee consist of only elected officials. So the movement towards that is completely in line with best practice. They also say that those individuals should have a basic understanding. And I think that if I spend enough time studying things like non-attest services, I might arrive at a basic understanding. And that committee then also has or should have access to the kind of very specific financial expertise that would be useful to hear from time to time, but is not essential in the audit committee itself. So given that the first attempt at this committee was, it kind of crossed a line for me, kind of the bounds of decency in the way people treat people. I would highly recommend that you change. Sorry, I'm not sure who was laughing there, but it's very rude. Yeah, all right. I would recommend that you change the makeup of the committee, and that you make a fresh start and proceed and make sure that our city finances are in good shape, which they appear to be, and that everything our auditing partner does is professional and to the highest standards possible. So I thank you on your work. I have more comments on other topics, but I'll come back another day and make those. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Let me remind everyone, we treat everyone with respect here, and we listen to everyone's views. So I would appreciate it if we stick to that.
Hi, it's Sue Polidora, Middle Street, and just wanted to clarify that when I first arrived, Councilor Cook and me were the only ones in the room. I took a brief
I saw you walk in.
You just ask her.
Please, let's stop having any side discussions.
Just ask, just,
No, could I call the meeting to order, please? No side discussions. And
Madam Chair,
try not to accuse anyone of it.
Madam Chair, you can set the record straight. Please do. All right?
I would like to hear your views.
Okay.
Mr. Chair.
And I would appreciate it if you can do that at the end of my comments. So, regarding the audit committee, what I'm hearing is that you need to disband it because, or reformat it because the city council is the one that needs to take charge of this, and the members have to be members of the city council. So right now, the makeup of the city council has, to my knowledge, and maybe I'm wrong, there are very few that have the skills necessary to be able to understand what an audit is, how is it performed, and the intricate details of it. So they rely 100% on city staff, which are the ones that are being audited, to tell them what to do, to tell the city council what to do. That is not the definition of oversight when you rely on the people that are being audited to make your opinion. It really isn't. So who are you going to rely? The city council had to rely on itself or appoint a group of people that are highly qualified to be able to be that segue that they lack. All right? So with that in mind, I sent Chris White an email. He's the chair of the audit committee, and I said, well, why don't I remember hearing a little bit about his resume before when all this started back a year ago. And I said, tell me a little bit about your background so I can relay that information when I'm my turn to speak. And this is what he wrote back. He says, I have an MBA from Columbia Business School, and I have a CFA Charter Financial Analyst. I have analyzed companies for investment purposes for 30-plus years and manage interest and client capitals in stock, bonds, and insurance companies, banks, and high net worth individuals. Audits have been a basic of all the my investment decisions. So, and Hawk Furman also has 40 years plus experience and has done been on the board of directors of several businesses. And Jesse has a similar background to Chris White. Now, who can you replace in city council? Who can you replace this experience with in the city council right now, or future city councils, that you can assure that there's going to be that kind of experience and background to be able to understand what it entails? Because remember, you have to be able to be the oversight for what the people being audited, which is the city. So you cannot just ask for people from the city to tell you what to do and then just say, okay, fine, thank you, vote for it. That's not oversight. You need to be able to, if you're going to be the governing body, you need to govern. You need to be the ones making the decisions. I don't believe that there's this kind of knowledge that is in depth. I mean, I have a business background too. I wouldn't dare to look at those books, to look at different things. I can manage the purchasing part of it, but is looking at it with detail and with knowledge requires someone that has experience doing it. I don't see it in many of the makeups of the present council or previous councils that I've seen in the 40-plus years that I lived in the city. So I'm thinking that you need this group. You need it to come alongside the city council to be the experts. They are all people that are doing this. It's volunteers. You don't have to pay them. You don't have to seek this out. They bring in that experience in. It's a good segue. It's a good help for the city council to obtain the expertise they need and they lack at zero cost to the taxpayers. So I'm kind of baffled that they even consider taking this taking this group away or reconfiguring it when it hasn't even been a year since it was formed. I really don't understand that at all. And like I said, this is the issue that brought me here. So I thank you very much for your time. And for clarification, Madam Chair, I would appreciate the timing of it.
Thank you, Sue. Is there anyone else?
Good morning, Bill Downey. Thanks for this opportunity to speak and for your time. There's been a lot of good points on both sides. One quick point I wanted to make is I know I've watched from afar, and one of the arguments has been, consistency and staggering of dates, and that makes perfect sense to me. The issue that I see that's vulnerable by eliminating private citizens is you have an opportunity to be shut out with experienced people in a committee. So if you have 2 or 3 city councilors that lose the election, you have lost the kind of institutional knowledge I think is very important. So I think in that regard, by having citizens, especially with expertise, which has obviously merit there, you eliminate that possibility of having a bunch of basically rookies that are unqualified or inexperienced. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, committee. My name is Liza Hewitt. I live at 726 Middle Road. I attended your last governance committee meeting and listened carefully to your discussion concerning the audit committee. Today, it appears it is your desire to change the audit committee ordinance to reduce the committee to 3 city council members, thus removing the 3 residents who currently make up half of the committee and, quite honestly, have all of the financial knowledge and experience. This is absolutely ridiculous. Mr. Lombardi said that he felt the residents should not be on the committee because they could not be trusted to see the books. Those books, Mr. Lombardi, contain my money and that of my fellow residents. Insinuating that City Hall and 3 city councilors are the only ones who can be trusted to see public financial records is just wrong. This is like saying that I must deposit my money in a savings account at the bank, which only the bank administrators are able to see, that I cannot be trusted to see my own account. The city's accounts contain my money that I pay in taxes and the money of every taxpayer in this city. The only reason that I can see that Mr. Lombardi, Ms. Cook, and Mr. Tabor would have to want to kick off the residents of this committee is because you and the city have something to hide, and I sincerely hope that that is not true. I have yet to hear you give a legitimate reason why you would want to remove the residents from the audit committee and have an audit committee represented by only 3 city councilors instead. I don't think you are thinking this through, what this means for the future of the audit committee. It seems to me that your only purpose in changing this ordinance and the committee membership is to kick off the 3 current residents, whose only crime has been to give their time and expertise to help ensure a proper audit. If this ordinance is changed, it is changed not only for the length of your terms, but also going forth into the future. So, I would like you to imagine that it is November 7th, 2023, and a new city council has been elected. Petra Huda, Chris White, Arthur Clow, Duncan McCallum, Roy Helsel, Greg Mahana, Sue Padura, Bill Downey, and Mark Brighton have all been elected to the city council. You now, thanks to your changes to the ordinance committee, thanks to your changes to the audit committee ordinance, have a new audit committee whose entire membership consists of 3 of these new councilors. You are not thinking past the tip of your nose, not thinking about the ramifications of a committee comprised wholly of 3 councilors. This is not good for the city. It may be good for City Hall and the Finance Department, who would like to keep the city's finances, continue to keep the city's finances from the residents whose tax dollars are entrusted to them, but it is not good for the residents and it's not good for the city. Focus instead on a committee of both city councilors and competent, experienced residents who together can choose a competent auditor. Thank you.
Thank you.
Peter, Portsmouth. In reviewing what is in front of me as the new audit ordinance, we are back to the same place that we were after we went in circles for the last 2 years, with the lack of independence. The biggest word in here is independent audit. Now, if I read the ordinance correct, you're taking out all of your financial experience. You're also, I don't know if anybody proofed this, but you're also putting on your members for 3 years, of which, as noted by Ms. Hewitt, the council terms only last 2 years. So you really can't put counselors on here because you don't know who they're going to be for 3 years. So I would ask you, please look at that. The next thing I would say is, in the terms of independence here, best practices of the GFOA, of which were quoted by Mr. Duffy, Councilor Tabor, everybody else at this table, the biggest problem with having counselors on the committee, as we noted by the statements that were made by Councilor Tabor last week, and I refer to a statement that was made in the audit committee, that we did not want to change auditors because we didn't feel we were properly staffed. Now, the audit committee is independent, or should be independent, of staff, totally here. What this tells me is that the counselors who are on here are not independent of the staff. They are looking at what is going on with the staff instead of looking at the RSAs, which independent financial people are put here to follow. Now, I'm not going to go and read the section of the Universal Revenue Code that proposes this, but I guess the question I would ask you on that, Councilor Tabor especially, or this was brought before the audit committee, is that if you had proper staff and you didn't perform what you should in the last 27 years, why are we at the place we are now? And as far as having proper staff, that is not the purview or has anything to do with the audit committee. That is the full control of the city administration, of which the city manager is the CEO. So bottom line, what I'm saying is, if the city council is this deep into working with the city staff on this, that totally negates any independence that you would have, first of all, which is the biggest thing on this. And the next thing is, I guess I would ask if you still have to perform an audit, whether you have the same auditor for 27 or 28 years, and then a new auditor, if you're coming up with lack of staff as a reason that you did not want to change auditors, is this what you would say to the Attorney General or to the Department of Revenue? We don't have the staff to perform these reports? I don't think so. So in looking at that as an excuse, and an excuse for putting non-qualified people basically on this board, I mean, you can't say that we're going to have any financial knowledge going forward, or we have it currently. So that's my current statement, and I look forward to a reread and correction of this. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone on Zoom who would like to speak? Please. It looks like Doug Roberts.
Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Doug Roberts, 247 Richards Avenue. So I've not seen the red line version, so what I have are just general comments based on my perception of how the audit committee has been working out. I think it's possibly reasonable to have an audit committee, although few cities in New Hampshire seem to have one, and there has been little or no evidence that Portsmouth's budget documents are not a, quote, fair representation of the soundness of city finances. Everything that I've found, including from the government finance officers under here, indicates that the governing body should comprise the audit committee, possibly supplemented by persons with expertise. In some cases, the city council as a whole takes on the job. We can see the problem when non-city council members try to require things of city management. When a dispute arises, like has happened with this committee, the committee is not seen as having the authority to require things by the city management. If the audit committee is to continue, I think that all or at least a majority of the members should be members of the city council. The chair should be a city council member. Some audit committee members have expressed concern that management mistakes and corrections might be hidden by the auditor because of their working relationship. If the council sees this as a problem, it could request the auditor include all this advice to the city management in a report. Finally, I think it is reasonable for the city to consider issuing an RFP after 20 years with the same firm and seeing what kind of responses it gets. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else on Zoom who would like to speak? Please raise your hand if it's the case.
I'd like to speak. I can't seem to get the hand to raise, but I'd like to speak.
Okay, please go ahead.
I'm Duncan McCallum, 536 State Street, and I agree with the views that have been expressed by several previous speakers. Like my friends Sue Polidora, Bill Downey, Liza Hewitt, and Peter Huda, I'm dismayed to hear that the city councilors, some of the city councilors, are considering eliminating the positions of the three citizen members of the audit committee. By so doing, what they're proposing to do is to remove the members with the most knowledge and expertise, that's the financial affairs and auditing, and leave the audit committee in the hands of the people who have the least knowledge and expertise. Now, it is clear to me, I attended the audit committee meeting of last week, and of course, I've been following the meetings of the city council and the governance committee, and it is clear to me that there are a number of city councilors who do not understand the concept of independent oversight, and that they don't understand the rationale between hiring an independent auditor in the first place. Independent means independent. It means that the auditor is supposed to deal with the city staff at arm's length. The auditor doesn't answer to the people he's auditing. The people he's auditing answer to him. And he answers only to the board of directors of the corporation, or, as in this case, in the case of the city, to the city council. Now, for the same reason that you don't hire the fox to guard the hen house, it is not a good idea to hire the same auditor year after year, as the city has done for the past 25 years. Because when you do that, what happens is that the members of the audit team become too cozy and familiar and chummy with the members of the finance department and the other city staff. They start to form interpersonal relationships which compromise their independence and their objectivity. They come in and do the audit every year, and they say to the members of the city staff, how's the wife and kids? How was your trip to Europe last year? Did your daughter get into Stanford? How did your son's baseball team do this year? And it's just a wrong relationship. As I say, the way it's supposed to work is that the auditors are supposed to remain at arm's length with the city staff. But what happens when you use the same auditor year after year, the auditing team doesn't want to step on anybody's toes. Consequently, they're less likely to criticize, they're less likely to point out flaws and problems in the way that the city is being run, and it's just not a good situation. Also, if the auditor wants to be rehired to do the work, to do the city's audit the following year, for the same reason that you don't bite the hand that feeds you, the auditor is going to try not to rock the boat. Consequently, he's going to be less candid, and again, less likely to make waves, less likely to point out flaws in the way that the city is running its business from a financial standpoint. Finally, of course, another glaring flaw, defect in the system, when you use the same auditor year after year, is the auditor is very, very unlikely to point out his own mistakes. If the same auditor that's being used year after year, for example, discovers in 2009 a blunder he made in 2014, it is highly unlikely that he's going to denounce himself and bring to anybody's attention the blunder that he made. Whereas in contrast, if you have a new independent auditor, the new independent auditor is not going to be so bashful. He's going to say, why did the auditor you had back in 2014 do this? I don't see that this makes any sense. What was his rationale for that? Now, these were all of the reasons why last year the City Council decided to hire a new independent auditor, and why it appointed 3 citizens members to assist in that process, appointed 3 citizen members to the audit committee who had financial experience and expertise to help select the auditor. The 3 citizen appointees who presently sit on the audit committee, as my friend Sue Polidora pointed out, are heavyweights. They all have extensive expertise in financial affairs. They have stellar credentials. They have all participated in audits. I suspect that some of them have even performed audits themselves. So by proposing to remove them, again, what you're proposing to do is to remove the members who are the most qualified and have the most expertise, leaving the committee with members who have the least experience, the least knowledge, and the least expertise. And needless to say, I do not recommend that course of action. Thank you.
Thank you. It doesn't look like there's anyone else on Zoom, so I'm going to go ahead and close public comment. With that, I want to move to committee discussion of the draft ordinance changes. I should note that we have 2 different draft ordinance changes in front of us. The first is Chapter 1, Article 3 on boards. And as the counselors look through these changes, you will note that they are all changes related to removing boards that we have discussed in the past that are now no longer operational. If there is agreement to move forward on this, I would entertain a motion to recommend the changes to Chapter 1, Article 3 for the council, and to move this to the council with a request for first reading. This is Chapter 1, Article 3 on boards. It eliminates the Board of Health, Board of Plumbing Examiners, and Portsmouth Heritage Museum Board.
So moved.
Second.
Is there any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. So we will move that one on to the council. The second part of the discussion is on Chapter 1, Article 4, which also removes several committees and commissions that are no longer active. That includes the Building Commission, the Planning and Development Council, the Micro Enterprise Advisory Committee, the Pierce Island Committee, and then has changes to the Audit Committee. I will entertain a motion to recommend these changes also to the council for first reading, and we will have discussion after, if there is a motion to do so.
Well, I will move that we move these to the city council.
Is there a second?
Would the maker of the motion accept a friendly amendment to change the terms of audit committee members from 3 years to 2, commensurate with
Yes.
council terms? I'll second.
Well, I will start then.
Okay.
I think I've said before that it's pretty clear that it's the role of the governing body to take on the responsibility of having an audit committee. And I think that that's pretty clear in most of the documentation that's been talked about today. I think that the audit committee of counselors will have the opportunity to get expertise outside of the staff. I think there was an implication that the only expertise that would be available to us would be from the staff, and I don't believe that is the case. And so if the audit committee, in the process of selecting an auditor, and then understanding the auditor's reports, could certainly receive advice from other learned people. I think that it is basically the responsibility of the city council to do this. And if the public feels that the audit committee is functioning in a way that is not to the benefit of the city, then that can be resolved at the ballot.
Madam Chair, first I want to go back to the argument that I made at the last meeting. Is there a benefit to having an audit committee? And I think there is. I think that we all agree that it's the city council's job to hire the independent auditor, and the relationship of the auditor is a relationship to the city council as the boss. As GFOA says, there are 3 participants in the audit: the auditing firm, the staff, and the city council. And the governing body, the city council, is first among equals. By first among equals, it means it's the city council who chooses the auditor, charges them with their responsibilities, and hears the report because it's the city council that's responsible for oversight of the staff. And I want to just read, as I've done back in the last council when this whole ordinance was debated, exactly what Government Finance Officers Association says is best practice. Every governing body, no matter how small the government, should establish an audit committee. The members of an audit committee should all, emphasized in their text, be members of the governing body for two principal reasons. First, oversight of the executive branch is a core responsibility of the legislative branch that cannot be delegated. That's the city council. And two, the inclusion of non-board members on the committee would inherently weaken both its real and perceived authority by creating a gap between ultimate decision-making power, i.e. the city council, and the committee. I think we've seen that play out. I think we've seen the audit committee in disagreement with staff, in disagreement with the council, and I think the simplest way is to do what is best practice. In fact, if that's best practice, isn't that the rebuttable presumption? Shouldn't we do that as the rebuttable presumption? Now, the arguments that we should have citizens' representatives, I'm not opposed to that, but I think the ultimate majority has to be city councilors. I think the relative expertise, and the audit and the GFA-OA says this, the relevant expertise is municipal finance expertise. I ran a business with $23 million of revenue and 200 employees, and I will tell you that municipal accounting is far different than what I ever knew as an executive in the private sector. So I think we're much wiser to have an audit committee that's a subcommittee of the council with 3 city council members and draw on the expertise of experts in municipal finance. Those experts have to be independent. They can't be any affiliation with staff, past or present employment, future employment. They have no affiliation with the audit committee. I'm sorry, the auditor. They have to be fully independent of both to give advice to the city council. I think if we have that, we have a sound audit committee that is made up of councilors, and as Councilor Lombardi says, the voters hold us accountable, not appointed citizen members of an audit committee. The voters hold us accountable as city councilors for oversight of the city's finances. That's where the responsibility lies. That's where it should exist in the audit committee. And I think that's why this proposal is sound.
Thank you. I would just like to add just a few words. I would agree with my fellow counselors on the governance committee and what they've said about an audit committee and the makeup of that audit committee and following best practice when it comes to GFOA guidelines. I would also note that the city council is elected every 2 years to serve in an oversight role. And one of the major roles of the council is to oversee the finances of the city. That's what we're elected to do as city councilors. And part of that is overseeing the audit. And since that responsibility resides with the council, that responsibility should stay with the council. When you appoint committees that are made up of individuals who are not elected, so therefore not necessarily representative of your residents, and you ask them to take on tasks that are the tasks of the council, first and foremost, you're diluting the power of your city council, and you're also diluting that power of oversight on the part of your city council. So because I have those concerns about an audit committee that is is appointed rather than made up of elected officials, I will support this change to the audit committee. Are there any further comments from counselors?
I think our draft has one area that we may think about amending, and that's empowering the city councilors on the audit committee to obtain independent expertise and define that independence. And I could propose language on that.
Can I ask, I want to ask a clarifying question of the legal department, if we can. Is there anything in the draft with the changes made that prohibits this committee from already seeking that advice?
No. It's a practical, not in the ordinance, it's a practical matter, the limitation is funding. And in real life, I think the way that has worked out is that the audit committee would request funding to retain expertise as required.
Do you feel it's necessary to clarify that in the ordinance, or?
Well, I think it would be important that whatever expert was hired has never been an employee of the city, has no relationships with city staff, has never been an employee of the audit firm, has no relationships with the audit firm.
Is this something that we need to define in the ordinance, or is this something that the committee itself can define in its own rules of operation, the committee level?
Well, I think following up on Bob's point, the way the ordinance is now, the committee would be free to request and provide direction to the city manager in the type of consultation that the audit committee would prefer. And certainly there are organizations here in the state of New Hampshire and New England where folks with the type of expertise you're looking for, they have connections to, retired municipal finance folks, who are not from around here, who've never been employed with the city of Portsmouth. So there's certainly, those people exist, and it's really just a matter of making a request with the kind of direction that you'd be looking for. Bob, does that sound about right?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm just thinking that rather than putting that in the ordinance, whether that is part of the rules of, or I'm not sure that needs to be in the ordinance, I guess is what I'm saying.
Maybe the simplest is I'll propose an amendment and we'll vote it. I would move to amend the draft ordinance that we have to state that the audit committee will be able to hire expertise at city expense if necessary in municipal finance and audits, and any experts hired will have no past employment with city staff or relationships therewith, or any past employment with the auditing firm or relationships therewith, and must be independent of both.
see if I can get this down.
Just by way of comment, the logical place for that amendment to be inserted would be at the end of section 1410, capital B. If that sentence could be put in that location, and it would make sense viewed in light of the rest of the ordinance.
Let me see if I have this down correct. The request is to add the language, the audit committee will be able to hire expertise at city expense if necessary in municipal finance and audits, and experts hired will have no past employment with the city staff or relationships therewith, with city or relationships therewith, or any employment with audit, any employment with the audit firm or relationships therewith, and shall be independent? Is that the?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes.
As you read it back, that seemed very broad in the sense that you only have a couple of audit firms throughout, who serve the New Hampshire market. And so almost any, retired person from some other municipality in the North Country, for example, is going to have at least some experience with one of the couple of audit firms that actually do work here. So as long as it's not too broad, that they aren't working for them or working for us, but they probably have worked with one of the 2 or 3 audit firms that actually do work here in the state of New Hampshire. So I wasn't sure as I was listening how broad that was, so just a cautionary note there.
And I guess I had the question, does the audit committee have the power to hire? Or do we, because that's what it is implying, I think. And that seems like a funny role for an audit, for any committee to be able to hire.
Do you want to go for that, Bob?
Yeah, well,
Explain.
first off, the use of the word hire is to be distinguished, I think, from retain the services of
Okay.
professionals, which is not hiring them.
Right.
Hiring them. So I'm thinking the audit committee could have the authority to retain the services of professionals, and as I said before, they just need the funding to do that.
Yeah.
Which they would acquire by talking to the city manager in the first instance, city council if necessary.
I want the language right.
Right, so the direct answer to the question is, could they hire? Direct answer is no.
Yeah.
But we could engage.
Yes. Request services of.
Counselor Tabor, I don't have a second yet on your amendment, but if I receive a second on the amendment, then we can suggest changes to the amendment.
Okay?
I'll second it.
I would like to offer a friendly amendment.
Sure.
The audit committee will be able to retain the services of professionals at city expense rather than hire expertise.
Okay. I'm fine with that.
And then I have another friendly amendment to suggest that maybe will satisfy deputy city attorney, deputy city manager's concern. Hired with no past employment, city staff, or current relationships therewith, the word current relationships therewith. And the same thing goes with employment with audit firm or current relationships therewith.
I'm fine with that.
Make sense?
It's good.
Okay. Does anyone have any more comments on the proposed amendment?
Except to add, of course, that this would be voted out of our committee and then further discussed by the council. So there'd be opportunity to improve it if we think we can at that level.
And let me clarify one more time, this amendment goes right under, is it section B?
Essentially, it's the last sentence of the ordinance.
Okay, all right. I'll call a vote on the amendment, proposed amendment. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. The amendment to the amendments is adopted. Is there any further discussion on the
The whole thing.
the whole ordinance change, Chapter 1, Article?
If I could make a comment. The governance committee has already determined to amend the term from 3 years to 2. I believe that was in response to former Councilor Huda's indication that the term should correspond to council terms so that somebody didn't get appointed for a 3-year term when they'd only be on the council for 2 years. Well, the only way you actually accomplish that result is by adding a sentence at the end of a 2-year term, coterminous with the term of the council. And the reason why you need that is, let's say this ordinance gets adopted in September. That means you would have councilors put on for 2-year terms in September. But in September, none of the councilors will be guaranteed 2 years on the council. So you have to make it coterminous
Yeah.
with the council.
Okay.
I would accept a motion to amend
So
Section
moved.
A to say that, exactly, after 2-year terms, comma, coterminous with the term of the council.
Yes,
period.
correct.
I'll second Councilor Lombardi's motion.
Is there any discussion on that change? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. So that change is approved as well. On the entirety of Chapter 1, Article 4, I believe there's already a motion on the table to adopt the changes. You should amend that motion to adopt the changes with amendments, with additional amendments. Can I get somebody to make the motion to approve the changes to Chapter 1, Article 4 with the amendments adopted
moved.
today?
Second?
Is there any further discussion? Right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Chapter 1, Article 4 then will also be moved to the council for just further discussion. I should note that there will be discussion at the council on any of these changes as well, and any ordinance changes have 3 readings at the council. So I welcome public input there as well. Let's move on to Section 2, discussion of parks options. That's 4B, actually. And I would like to welcome our Director of Public Works, Peter Rice, to join us. As the counselors will remember, in our last discussion, we met with other individuals from the city staff to ask questions about a potential addition of a Parks Committee or a Parks and Rec Committee, and we're still in the initial phases of this discussion. We don't have a draft ordinance around this yet. We're just having general discussion. So we invited Peter Rice here to speak with us today, to share his thoughts on parks and overview of parks for council level. So welcome any input you can provide us.
So I have not given great thought to this, whether it's appropriate to create a separate committee. I feel there are a number of committees that have, that provide these roles. The Tree and Greenery Committee and the Recreation Board probably, are the ones that are most relevant to this discussion. And not that I would discourage additional committees, but I am going to discourage additional committees. We already, it's very challenging to staff the number of committees that we have now and to provide the level of support that's expected and deserving of these important discussions. And not really understanding the goal or what exactly, what is the current challenge that's trying to be resolved by the potential creation or adjustment of an existing committee that, you know, what I understood in part was that there was questions relative to programming of passive recreation, and there was a concern that existing parks weren't either being supported or nobody was speaking for them. So I'm not sure if that's, you know, I guess I'd be interested to hear exactly what your thoughts were relative what the challenge that needed to be resolved or improved on, and if there was a refocus of existing committee that may be able to address the concern. Excuse me. So if I guess that's the input given the limited understanding of what you're trying to accomplish.
Okay. I can provide some thought on that, because I did submit a list of things that might be included in the committee, and as I looked at that, as I did that and went through it, I found a lot of the things I was talking about are actually covered not only by recreation, but also a lot by I've lost the committee name.
The Trees and Greenery Committee, or?
Well, not even trees and greenery, but also just environmental. Sustainability committee in terms of monitoring the site, monitoring species, monitoring endangerment, invasives, things like that. So I'm not sure there is a need. After going through that exercise, I submitted a list, and I don't know whether you saw that or not, but.
I have not seen it yet. Perhaps it gets forwarded to me, and
Or perhaps I didn't see it.
I get hundreds of emails, and I'm not always, especially when it comes to the deputy city manager, I typically pay attention to those. So I do not recall seeing one.
Okay. But I just thought that it was overlapping a lot. And so I'm not sure we need another layer, if you will. But I think that there are some things about parks that are beyond recreation. And just an acknowledgement of that that need to be addressed, and that's and those are mostly environmental things, I think. So
So, you know, we have some very talented staff that do address invasive species concerns, especially along Fortree Island. The horticulturalist that works at Prescott Park has had a 3-year program so far to go through and work significant efforts to keep the invasives at bay. But our arborists are very knowledgeable. Our turf management folks are using compost tea versus synthetic compounds for fertilizers. And there's a lot of information and a lot of knowledge. And we've talked about the Tree and Greenery Committee expanding its roles beyond trees, which has predominantly been its focus in the past, to expand to more broader discussion. But I'd be more than willing to explore, once I dig out that email I'm sure you sent to me, and better understand what the thoughts are and how best to refocus some of the efforts within the committees that currently exist, and whether there's an opportunity to do that. So I know the rec director has expressed interest in at least on the programming and the passive recreation, to better support that, because historically, recreation was oftentimes thought of sports. And the acknowledgement that, what people, a lot of folks want to support the parks, and they want to utilize the parks, and that is recreation as well.
Yeah.
So,
I think I would add, I'm the person who brought this forward. And the reason I did so is that I had concern around preserving green space within the city and making sure that we have a mission and that we have the council and that volunteers in the city are focused on preservation of green space. I know the staff is. I know the staff's doing a fantastic job of doing that. And Trees and Public Greenery is doing a great job of thinking very deliberately about trees and replacement. But the question I think comes up, is someone making sure that we're identifying and conserving the existing green space that we have, the remaining green space that we have, and that we're protecting that for the future, and that we have a vision and a strategic plan around that preservation of green space within the city for things like passive recreation. I realize recreation, the rec board does a fantastic job thinking about recreation opportunities and the spaces that we have. They're defined for recreation opportunities. But it becomes much more difficult when you're dealing with a space like the Great Bog.
right.
What are we doing to make sure that we are affording our residents access to a space like that, or controlling access to a space, which in some cases the Conservation Commission would like to make sure that we control access and that we limit use of space that should be conserved and not utilized, even for passive recreation. So I guess what I was thinking is having someone thinking not just about recreation, but thinking more deliberately about parks and what is the long-term vision for the city of Portsmouth around parks. And so that's why the proposal, I think, initially came forward to this committee. And I realize we're doing this in many different places, but I don't know who's shepherding that bigger vision.
Well, I know Peter Britz, the environmental planner, has been heavily involved with the open space planning and looking at opportunities to procure additional conservation land to that end. So, and the council has provided funds in the past, and there are monies available currently for matching funds or for purchasing funds. So I would, to me, it's a combination of the Conservation Commission probably is the most logical place for a lot of these concerns relative to preservation of open space and a lot of the work they do, and they've expressed a lot of interest in that, I know. The Tree and Greenery Committee is the kind of the hands-on aspects of managing the city's trees, and then the Recreation Board is the one that looks at the uses for these spaces. I could envision a joint work session to kind of talk about the overlapping kind of interests between those different committees, and to see if there's some logical extension or just the communication itself might be a way to make people more aware of the different types of roles for these committees and what they do.
Councilor Teague.
Yeah, I think, Peter, thank you for the fantastic maintenance of the parks that we have now. Obviously, as somebody on the Arts Festival Board, we engage with the city, Corin and everybody down there, and they do a great job keeping the park clean, well-maintained, and it's really come a long way since moving out of the trustees at trust funds. When you look at the city as a whole, the last two master plans have really strong voices in the public engagement about every chance we have for green space, every chance we have for recreation. we want to find that. So I think the question I would ask, and the governance committee is asking, is parks don't happen by themselves. The programming at the parks doesn't happen necessarily by itself. Have we got the best governance structure for adding to our park space? A master planning around the park space we do have. We've had master plans for Pierce Island and Prescott Park, but there's many others. And making sure that we make the parks that we do have useful to the public in the most ways we can. So, you know, if you think of a couple examples, that makes it a little more clear. We've got all the land at Jones Avenue, which is essentially, we've got some walking trails, but could that be more? We've got the Great Bog, as Councillor Cook mentions. There have been plans in the past and a study done to activate the Worth Lot and the Bridge Lot as parks. We've got a master plan for Prescott Park we're very active with. We've got a master plan for Pierce Island we've pretty much finished. But are we master planning around all of our park space and looking for areas we can get more? I guess that's where I come from. And I think of the efforts that we've had about Worth Lot and Bridge Lot. Who's advocating for that? You know, if we could make that into public space. Who's advocating for more uses of the Great Bog? So that was the question that we asked. And I'm not sure, you know, one answer would be to have a parks board that would look at inventory all of our property and inventory all our opportunities. There have been past mayors in Portsmouth's history. F.W. Hartford was one who would proudly find a piece of land that somebody you know, was willing to give up and sell it and have the city buy it. And he'd say, and now we have, you know, a pool at Pierce Island, something like that. So that's where that's the question. I think it's kind of getting us, making us think. Is there a better governance structure we can have? Because there's such a clear chorus in every time I do a master plan of, we want green space, we love green space, we want to be an active user of green space, and we want to maximize it at all times.
Because again, you know, I did talk to Peter Ritz, and he showed us that map of all the places that the city owns that are just, you know, empty spaces, if you will.
Conservation, yeah.
And it's pretty astounding how much space there is. And so I think part of the thought was, in terms of those spaces, on identifying them and looking at them holistically for the city and preserving them. Again, to Councilor Tabor's point, that we always are hearing green space, green space. So, and I'm impressed with the amount of green space we have. So, whether it's could be managed better, I don't know. And or do we need more oversight? I don't know. But
Well,
I like the idea of having the conversation between the various committees that have influence over those spaces.
Councilor Tabor, were you going to add anything, or?
Well, it's just, maintenance is different than, we're maintaining very well, but are we looking at all the opportunities for residents from all neighborhoods to use what land we have?
So if I may, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, go first.
The challenge is balancing resources, and there are many green spaces throughout the city that organically act as places for people to recreate and do things, and they're not structured, and they're hidden gems for each of the neighborhoods. And to formalize them as into some large series of maps, and then to create a structure or something like that that would then try to maximize their use or whatever, is a significant level of additional work and efforts that would be generated. And for staff, and obviously if the city council allocates budget and does that, that's what we do, we maintain those things. However, from my perspective, as somebody that, I've lived in town for quite a while, I don't know, 35, maybe 40 years, I can't remember, back, I was in and out in the beginning. But I've also utilized the green spaces. I've explored, I paddle up the areas, I ride my bicycle into the woods, I hike in the woods, and I see a lot of the places that people utilize, and they do these things, and I think our structure is okay right now. I think it's a matter of letting it organically, if there's areas that, like the skateboard park that's coming along, there's areas around that skateboard park that are really ripe for potential enhancement. And the rec board is aware of that, and they're talking about that. But it's happening kind of organically, as attached to the thing, and it's kind of growing instead of just creating this more external, bigger, vision, letting it start small and growing. So I personally, I feel like the system is working well. I think an opportunity to bring the different committees together to have a discussion about it might point to, hey, well, what if we had a subcommittee within the tree and greenery things, so make it parks, trees and greenery, so modify the scope of that, or the Concom, have them have a subgroup that's focused on preservation or something that allows for looking at those opportunities. But I'm not sure. I think it's an important topic to discuss, but I'm not sure creating another superstructure for all intents and purposes to create something that isn't necessarily being driven from below.
I'm happy with that.
Couple of thoughts. Maybe we should relook at the vision or mission of the rec board, and if it needs some encouragement or tweaking or additional members, we could look at that again to make sure there's enough emphasis on that non-programmatic recreation aspect, just to kind of give it light and give it air, and maybe that begins to capture some of what I know I've heard from various folks about wanting to make sure that the passive recreation pieces are not overlooked, and that there's a bigger, more holistic focus. And that might be one way to kind of approach this, is just kind of look at it afresh, and maybe it just needs a conversation about it. And certainly as our new rec director has come on board, he certainly is sensitive to those other pieces. And so maybe it's that kind of relook within that existing structure that gives air to this concern as to whether it's looking holistically enough. The second piece is, I can tell you, and I'm sure Bob could chime in as well as Peter, is that from time to time, city staff will become aware that someone is looking to sell the city a piece of property that may be difficult to develop or not developable at all, really, under the current standards. and they will reach out, and what typically happens is we, at a staff level, look at it. Does it have conservation value? In which case, do we maybe send it to the Conservation Commission for consideration of using some of their funds to acquire it? Does it link up to something that we see coming down the pike? I know Peter Britz has been involved, I think, with like a wildlife corridor type of study. You know, does it link up into something like that? Is it next to a water body where we may have our stormwater hat on in terms of, is this needed for flood control or other purposes? So I will say, in terms of the, you know, being on the lookout for additional properties, I can easily think of a number that over the last, 10 years that have come through, some of which we've gone all the way to acquisition, and others that are like, there's no money for this, it's not that valuable a parcel, it doesn't seem to fit in a neighborhood. Like, we can't find a good, way to justify the expense of that. Bob, is that your sense too, that we tend to hear about pieces that come, that people might be interested in either giving or selling to us at a discounted price, so to speak?
Yeah, that's, probably hear about that in the legal department as often as any other place, or in the city manager's office as well. People who have that kind of an interest, that's the way they go.
I appreciate this discussion because I like the idea of having a joint meeting between the committees that actually have the expertise on this area, to see if they have any suggestions on ways to make sure that we're good stewards of open space for everything from recreation to conservation. And I also like the idea of looking at the rec board and seeing if they feel like their mission addresses passive recreation as well as it does active recreation. And if not, if there's any need to amend that, those goals. So I appreciate your insight here into this, because clearly we're just asking these bigger questions, like, does it make sense? Who would have the expertise? Who should we be talking to? And so I appreciate that you have that direct insight, and the insight of working with trees and greenery is actually extremely helpful. Yeah. Are there any other questions that we have today? Does the committee generally want to keep exploring this and continue to have conversations, maybe on the side with the heads of committees instead?
I'd be very happy to see a joint meeting, a conversation, public meeting perhaps, among the parties that are responsible for the use and care of public space, open space. Again, as Councilor Tabor says, people are really interested in the green space of this city, and I doubt that people really know the extent of it, too. Not that we want to advertise it necessarily, as you say, that many are, little secret places for various communities that that use. You don't want to structure everything there.
Councilor Tabor, do you have any thoughts on moving forward?
I'd like the idea of a work session with the various committee chairs, or maybe even members. And maybe one of the elements of that discussion is the map that you looked at.
Mm-hmm.
This is the green space we have, and also a look back at some of the strategic plans we've had around parks and recreation. I know that at one point there was a concept of a necklace of parks around the downtown.
An emerald.
Right.
So since at least the majority of the committee is interested in having this discussion and fostering this discussion, we can either, I guess, invite committee chairs here to have that discussion, or we could ask the city if they want to convene a special discussion separate from this committee with those committees.
I think that it's probably outside the purview of the governance committee's agenda, and that I would like to see it happen, but I think that it's something that the city could do without this committee.
Yeah, I'm willing to offer that we could work with the chairs of the three boards. Well, I've got Recreation, Conservation Commission, Trees and Greenery, to see if we could find, I'm guessing it will be fall sometime, an evening where the three boards could come together and make this the topic of conversation in terms of open space and open space uses, and see if we can come up with like an agenda so they cover the topics and kind of look at each board's responsibility, and then how they work together, and whether they see that there's any gaps that might need to be filled, or how their mission might encompass this conversation. So as long as we don't need to do it right away, given that it's a fairly large group, we could see if we could find a place to hold such a meeting. So.
Would you mind getting back to the governance committee if there's any challenges around that? If
Sure.
we need to if they're asking for enabling vote by the council or something to have a meeting.
Yeah, I will. I think my guess is they'll be more than willing to convene a special meeting with, some of the other committees, as long as they have an agenda and know what they're going to talk about, so.
I think it would be a good public meeting.
Yes, a public meeting with each board committee in one group.
Okay. Thank you so much for coming, Director of Public Works. We appreciate it. It is getting late. It's 12:16. Are we okay to move to the last item on the agenda? Is everyone okay? Okay.
Adjournment.
Okay, all right. The last item I have on the agenda for today is Public Art Ordinance, Public Art Review Committee, and this is just the first time this is coming before us. I will share my screen so I can see it if I can. Let me see if I can get the Zoom to let me do so. This is the existing public art ordinance. And we are looking at potential changes to this ordinance, two policies of the council as well that are related to this ordinance, and also potential addition of another public art committee, review committee ordinance. So the current ordinance provides for public art, and we all think about it as this kind of the percentage for art and public art program. And I guess I should go back here. It's where it starts is funding of public art and the statement of purpose, definition of public art. Wouldn't make any recommendations for changes here. But when we get to the exemption, the reason that this was raised is that the sewer plant came online last year and does not have a public art project associated with it, even though we have a percentage for art program. And the question was, this was excluded because the ordinance basically said that if it's not a location where it seems reasonable to have public art, you can exclude it. When there was another option that I think was not envisioned when the ordinance was written, that you could, instead of excluding public art, you could have public art in another location in the city using the percentage for arts program. So this change that's in bold is a recommendation coming from me looking at this. adding, in those cases, the public art associated with the project should be placed on other publicly owned property within the city at the determination of the council. So instead of the option just to exclude public art, it would be you continue to have public art just in another location. And then the other recommended change that I was offering for the ordinance is under the funding accepted, the opportunity for the council to accept donations with a designated purpose for commissioned art. So the recommendation was to have language saying, this ordinance also authorizes the council to accept donations with a designated purpose to commission works of public art to be placed on public property. The commissioning process shall follow the same procedures outlined in the ordinance for public art associated with capital expenditures by the city. Because we've had some requests for individuals who've raised money that would like to donate it for a piece of public art, but they don't want to predetermine what that art looks like, but they have the funds that they would like to donate for that purpose. So allowing the city to accept those funds to commission art in the same manner that we would for the percentage for the art program. So this is just like the beginning of the recommendations. I will also share with you additional recommendations and I want to kind of demonstrate how all of these things are tied together. The secondary recommendation is to look at public art policies for the city. And here are the public art policies. The current public art policies, the challenge we have around them is we have two currently. And they refer any action on public art to ArtSpeak, which no longer exists, which is the challenge we have right now with public art proposals. So the recommendation that I was making is, first of all, to combine the two ordinances. Right now we have a public art acquisition policy, and then we also have a secondary policy here, policy regarding public art. To move the language from the second policy into the first. So we only have one policy instead of two separate policies. And you'll see that language here. And then to change slightly the provisions that you must include a cash steward to should, letting the council determine whether or not a piece of art needs to have a stewardship donation. And to change language from ArtSpeak to the committee. And the reason that you would do that is so that you'd have a separate committee to review public art proposals, since we don't have ArtSpeak in place anymore. And this change on time to time was just an editing change. So with that said, the reason we would make those changes is because we would envision a committee, and I will share that now. And this would be a new committee, a public art review committee. So this would establish that by ordinance, a committee to review public art proposals, since ArtSpeak no longer exists to do that. And it would follow the exact same guidelines that we have used in the past that are in the public art policies that are adopted by the council in 2015. Follow exactly the same guidelines, the exact same recommendations that came out of that were already adopted. And it would establish a standing committee, but that meets as needed to review art proposals. This would provide us with the committee we need so that we're not setting them up in an ad hoc fashion with the expertise that was initially envisioned in 2015 when ArtSpeak drafted these recommendations for public art for the council. So this takes all the recommendations directly and puts them in an ordinance and basically defines what a public art committee would do. And only requires them to meet quarterly, and that's the requirement, but then as needed. It would also allow them to make recommendations back to the council on resources for public art, for the Public Art Trust, recommendations for capital projects and that we could incorporate in those things. So, so this is very initial. I'm just sharing them today for the governance committee to look at and review and see where we are and what they think of adding this provision, which would allow us to avoid an ad hoc process that we've struggled with, frankly. Right now, we're in the process, and the city manager's doing that now for the council since ArtSpeak no longer exists. So are there any comments or questions about what we should do to move forward with this? Yes, Councilor Tabor.
I think we certainly need the PARC committee that you outlined for ad hoc decisions. I'm just wondering what the quarterly meetings will do. You know, could this body exist to be pulled together when we have a 1.5% pot of money and we have a decision to make? I'm just, and that's, I'm thinking and talking at the same time, which is always dangerous, but that's just a first reaction. And, but I also like the fact that we now have a body that can review situations like we have one of our I-95 interchanges where somebody says, I'd like to donate a piece of art for that. Well, I think, what will it be? What will it look like? What will the design criteria be? How will it, you know, and there's an aesthetic consideration there too. So I think that's great.
Yeah, I would agree. I'm not sure what the committee would do on a quarterly basis. I mean, it would be wonderful if Portsmouth had that much art coming to it. Because we're an art-filled city. I just think that a more ad hoc schedule might be appropriate.
Okay. Would the committee like for me to bring in some experts, I guess the individuals that were part of drafting these guidelines? I think they're still present in the community, and these recommendations came from them in 2015. I would be happy to invite them in to get their thoughts on why they made these specific recommendations for a committee. Okay. Okay. I'm happy to do so at our next meeting.
And what to avoid that led to ArtSpeak, you know, fading out. How do we make this a little more robust and sturdy?
I'll just point out that ArtSpeak was a nonprofit. This is not envisioned
Yes.
to be a nonprofit.
Right.
So,
Yes, although it started as a committee.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay. I will gladly invite individuals. If there's no further discussion on those, I guess that gives you the highlight of where that's going. Is there any other public comment? And if we can, let's limit our public comment just to a minute, if we can. Is there any additional public comment on anything that we've discussed beyond the committee as an ordinance review, parks and public art? Go ahead.
Sue Polidura, I'm just wondering if the chair is going to react to my request about clarification on earlier comments.
Yes, I will, but at the end of the meeting.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else? Anyone on Zoom? Okay. And is there any other public comment on anything the governance committee has on the agenda for the future? No? Okay. with that said, I'll close the public comment session, and the other business that's sitting on our agenda currently, well, we're kind of late today, it's about 12:30 now, I think we need to probably close this meeting. The other business that's sitting there is the Historical Archive Blue Ribbon Committee. Recommendations, which I believe, Councilor Lombardi, I think you're tackling that right now.
Yeah, I actually, I guess, I want to say Kathleen, that's not right.
Christine.
Christine submitted something, and I worked on it, and so,
I sent it back to you. So,
yes,
okay.
right, yes. So we've been
Think I
working
did.
on,
Yep.
working on that, and I don't know if it's time, we could send that to the whole committee, I guess.
Whenever you're ready,
Okay.
I'm happy to.
I want to look at it again. It's not in any kind of ordinance form. It's just, ideas for it, so.
Okay. So maybe we can discuss that at our next meeting, I'm guessing towards the end of August is our next meeting,
Okay.
if that works for you?
Yeah, oh, yeah.
Okay. And I think I have written down that Counselor Tabor was looking at a community campus process discussion.
I've had some tangential discussions so far, but nothing yet for us.
Okay. Just let me know.
That
when
may
you
be
want-
September.
Okay. Yes, just let me know when you're ready to bring that forward, and we will.
Okay.
On the agenda. We also we've been tasked by the council to review the sidewalk policy. I don't have a timeline for that, review on the sidewalk policy. I'm guessing that will probably be September. And the other task that we're going to have to address that's listed here is conflict of interest. If you remember, that's a section of the ethics ordinance we didn't take up yet. But it also involves policies of the council and the charter as well, including the donations policy, which I believe we're already working on.
Yes, staff is working on that, and in fact, I think you will see at least some evolution of the thought on how to talk about donations and how we record and bring them forward to the city council. You'll see that in the next agenda.
Okay. So we're likely to start discussions around conflict of interest policies, the charter donations policy, end of August or September
Okay.
as a group. And I think one of the reasons I put this here today is that I thought it was important to look at the public art policy and to see how it crosses several different areas that we deal with as a council. It's not just an ordinance issue, it's an ordinance and a policy issue and guidelines issue. So we have that in several different places. So sometimes when you address things like conflict of interest, you have to address it in several areas. So we will do that, try to do that in conjunction, one thing in conjunction with another as a council, so that we're adopting those all at a reasonable time frame together, any changes for the council. We're making those recommendations together. So is there any other business that I'm missing? Nope. Okay.
I don't think so, not that I know of.
All right. Can I get a motion? Oh, wait. There is one other item under business. Next meeting. What is availability for the next meeting? I know I am not available for several weeks, which is a challenge.
Yeah.
So I'm looking at our next meeting sometime. I was hoping for one of the last 2 weeks of August, maybe August the 29th.
I'm away a lot of August as well, but the 23rd, Tuesday the 23rd works for me.
That's a Tuesday.
I know I won't have any time to prepare anything for that meeting, so it would require somebody else on the governance committee to set the agenda and to prepare it
For the 29th?
for the 23rd.
Oh,
For the 23rd. I won't be,
Right, you won't be back in
I
time.
won't be back in time to prepare anything.
Let's look at the
You can't
29th.
make the 29th, John?
I could by Zoom.
Okay. We want to do, is there another date that works better for you?
The 23rd, I know, but I'll be back in town. But I can flex, you know. If I can attend by Zoom, I'm good with whatever
Okay.
else works.
I think that if we have one member attending by Zoom, do we have enough of a quorum to still meet and
You
make
need a
decisions?
quorum physically present. Anybody else can attend by Zoom.
Okay, so with two of us here, that would be reasonable?
Yep.
Okay.
10
Are-
o'clock?
Are you okay with the 29th at 10?
Yeah.
Okay. 29th at 10 o'clock. So the next meeting of the committee will be August 29th at 10 o'clock in the morning, and we will take back up the issues we're still discussing. I have no other business, but I want to reiterate one thing before I ask to close the meeting. It's very important to me that we respect one another here and that we listen to each other's views and that we allow everyone to speak. I'm not very particular about speaking order. I think that everyone has a right to be heard. And I don't think it matters what order we speak in. Even under public comment, I think everyone should be heard no matter what order they're speaking in, no matter when they arrive to the meeting. So I would just ask that everyone who comes respect one another to allow everyone the opportunity to speak. It's valuable to me when I hear from all of you, and I think it's valuable to the committee to do so as well. And I don't want to be in a situation where we have to create a sign-up list for this committee, because I think that everybody here can be respectful of one another and let everyone have their turn, whether or not they were here first. So that's what I'd like to say about that issue. I want to thank you all for sharing your input with the committee today. I really do appreciate hearing from all of you. That said, I'd take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.